muted.
All right. Yeah, there you are. All right. All right. Come on. Yay. Hello. It's me again. But this time you did it to yourselves. You chose to come to this session. You could have listened to someone else. Actually, you're going to listen to 4 really, really interesting people who have far better things to say than I do. Right now, I'm just killing time till everybody comes in. All right. But I have that it's 1:30 and I run a tight ship. In case you haven't been in one of my sessions, I tolerate no nonsense. So yeah, I do, but that's a different story. Folks who are presenting remotely, can you please keep an eye on the chat, because that's where you would get any messages from our wonderful tech person, Dylan, to say you need to stop talking now. So hopefully everybody is going to be in a good place. We've got about 20 minutes per presenter, and that includes time for questions. So if everybody can try and aim for that 15 minutes with some questions in, then things will work very smoothly. So without no further ado, I will press record before I get, no, you already did that? Excellent. All of my babbling is now saved for posterity. Let me take the minute to introduce our first speaker. Let me do the sharing thing. Get this up and do this thing. And see, this is why you don't let me do this stuff. Nope, I'm not doing that. The Dylan's going to do that while I read this. So Alexandra Stam is a senior researcher at FORS, the Swiss Center of Expertise in the Social Sciences, since 2009, working within the archive unit. She is leading the data management support group and is particularly keen in helping researchers to implement good data management practices. Trained as a geographer, her research interests are on new forms of migration, particularly student mobility and marriage migration. She completed a PhD in 2011 on marriage migration and the geographies of love. Oh, we are so going to have fun tonight. Combining both quantitative and qualitative methods. Her presentation is joint work with several co-authors and is titled, I didn't do that, by the way, and is titled Responding to the Replication Crisis, Requirements and Stakes for Archives. Please give me give a warm applause for Alexandra. And of course, there's no stairs on the side where the podium is, so you're taking your life in your own hands.
So good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Sam said, this presentation has been prepared with several of my colleagues, and one of them, Brian Kleiner, is here. So he may intervene if I forget something or say something I shouldn't say. So So I will start by saying a few words about my institution so that you know where I come from. Then, yeah, just sorry, little technical issues. Yeah, I can keep talking. So, so a few words about my institution, and then I will be addressing replication needs, which resulted in the development of a new tool, SubReplica, which I will present to you. And I will end with a few words about what we learned and next steps. So now it's me who has a problem to move the slides because I'm pressing the wrong buttons. Sorry, I have to press here.
No,
Oh.
right now, it's just the wrong thing.
Oh, okay, then it's, no, it's sorry, very sorry about this.
Okay.
Like to go to next one, where would you press? To use this one, yeah. Okay, then that's fine, yeah. So You may have heard of FORCE, the Swiss Center of Expertise in the Social Sciences. We are located at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland, but we serve the entire community of social science researchers. We are involved in a wide range of activities. For example, we produce data. That's an important activity we do. We run national and international surveys. We do research. But what I really want to lay the emphasis on today is on our infrastructure. So we have a data archiving and dissemination service, as well as our development activities, such as the development of cutting-edge tools. So one of these tools is SwissUBase, which was previously known as ForceBase. It's our online platform for sharing and accessing research data. So we are the main repository, domain-specific repository for the social sciences in Switzerland, but we do have some disciplines that are better represented than others. So as part of our efforts to reach out to underrepresented disciplines, such as psychology or economics, we identified a need for the sharing of replication materials. And this is how we started addressing replication needs. So just a few words of backgrounds. So in recent years, replication has received increased attention within the social sciences. You have probably heard about the replication crisis in psychology in the 2010s, where it appeared that many experiments could not be reproduced or replicated. And this led to international initiatives to increase reproducibility, such as Open Science Framework. Today, more and more science funders and social science journals require the sharing of codes, syntaxes, and other materials, including data needed for replication. And what is really lacking is really infrastructure that can host such materials. Like, for example, the journals, I mean, they require the sharing of these materials, but often they do not have the right infrastructure to receive and to host that materials. So in this context, data repositories are very well placed to engage with this reflection and to think about possible solutions for replication materials, since we already have experience in hosting research data. So when we think about Switzerland, like in many other countries, there's been new policies and requirements from the main funder, as well as from journals. So basically, researchers are expected to share the data used in their publications. We could see this at FORCE with an increase of deposited data sets that were linked to publications, but also more and more requests for assistance. So researchers who wanted to deposit replication materials, they came to us and they needed help because basically our system was not very well fitted for such kind of materials. So they needed help and how to do it and so on. And this is also where we noticed that there is a difference about having research data, like archiving research data for reuse, as opposed to replication materials, which require distinct materials, metadata workflows, and access conditions. So our system, SwissUBase, in its current form, is not ideal for handling replication materials. So we figured out we needed really to come up with a solution, one that would be available quickly, so an interim solution, and as well think about something more sustainable on the long run, and that could be integrated into SwissUBase. So the first step we started to think about the minimum conditions that were needed for handling replications materials. And so we figured out a number of points which are listed on this slide, such as the attribution of DOIs, a minimum metadata for filtering and searching, policies, for example, what data do we accept? So a system where we can deposit replication files, the storage of files, the fact that they should be findable, accessible, but we also had to think about licenses or contracts. be able to link it to specific publications, to assure basic quality control, also provide a minimum of guidance, and replication files should be able to be linked to full data sets of same project. So this was our list of, minimum requirements that we wanted to implement within a solution. So then we came up with a concept, and the key characteristics of that concept included, well, a in-house web-based provisional solution. It had to be simple to program, implement, and use. It had to be open access, and there should be the possibility of future integration into Swiss Ubase. And this is how was born SubReplica, so our new tool, our new solution. So basically, it's a tool and a service for the sharing and dissemination of replication materials related to publications. It's intended to host materials of Swiss researchers working in Switzerland, or researchers publishing in Swiss journals. So there is a very strong Swiss component to it. And it enables the uploading of replication materials and obtaining a DOI in accordance with the requirements of scientific journals. So what can be shared on SubReplica? So basically any materials and informations that are needed for replicating an article or research results. So this could be like a partial data set, so just the variables needed for replication. So we do not want to have full data sets, but it also includes README files, syntaxes, reports, and the link to the full data set if the data set is elsewhere. So now from a researcher's perspective, how does it work? Well, basically it's very simple. So the researcher first needs to download a deposit form, and he will need to complete then this deposit form with a set of metadata fields. I will show you in the later slides what metadata we're asking. So just need to complete the form, then choose a license. So we decided to go for 2 licenses, the CC BY and the CC BY non-commercial, and it's written very small here, but non-derivative. So basically then they choose, and then they just need to send the form and the materials to our service. So here on this slide, you can see the metadata fields that we ask. So very basic. We really wanted to stay basic. So the name of the depositor, affiliation, title, subject, geolocation, article abstract, material descriptions, source of the data, software information, complementary information, publication date. So a set of like metadata. Now, from the user's perspective, is also very, very simple. First, when they access the website, they can see the projects for which we have replication materials. They click on the project and then simply need to press on download, and they get access to all the replication materials, including a README file and information about the license. And then from the archives perspective, it's also a very simple process. Like first, data experts need to review the materials that we received. So make sure they are complete, they are coherent, easy to understand. Then they have to validate the materials. At this moment, there's an assignment of a DOI. And then finally, the materials will be published on the date that was chosen by the authors. So now I come to the next steps, and also further developments. So I will start with main lessons learned. So basically, so we found out that archives, technical solutions for the sharing of research data are not always suitable for handling replication materials. Often we ask much more, like for full research data, people need to log in, there's much more metadata. So we really needed to find something much simpler for replication materials. Archives are well positioned to handle replication materials, And failure to do so may lead to researchers depositing their research data elsewhere, because like often researchers want to have everything in the same place. They do not want to put their replication material in one place, then their research data elsewhere. So there's really this need of thinking of something that is that integrates the different needs of the research community. So one tool ideally should allow it all. But we are at the very start of this. So we just basically finalized sub-replica. So it's brand new. So now we are still waiting for materials to arrive, replication materials to arrive. And once we will get these materials, we will also identify possible challenges and we will learn from it. So for example, about handling data protection issues or resources for quality check, because we have like staff that are doing this, but we have also to assess now in reality how much time it will take them. And then there was this I go back there, sorry, the further developments, yeah, the cat is coming soon, but at the very end. So the further developments, so consideration for going forward. So we will now be testing this. We also do pilots with journals. In the long run, SwissUBase should probably be adapted to include a replication solution. So we'll include it in our online platform. And we will also add new features, like there are still things missing, like peer review process, versioning, data citation, and add other solutions like pre-registration. So we still need to, I mean, it's work in progress, basically. So now I come to the cat and to the questions, if there is any.
Any questions?
Yeah.
3 in the chat. Okay, wait.
There are quite many.
We'll start with the chat first.
Okay.
Sorry, I have a question too.
Okay, I'm going to read the first chat question. Please explain what you meant by policy more. Is it referring to terms of use, reuse, or license, or something different?
Policy is a large word in general. So first, it's also what kind of data do we accept, like also from in-house policy, but then it also involves like consideration of licenses and so on. I don't know, Brian, if you want to say more. No, that's fine. Yeah. So it's a very large term.
Next question from the chat.
Okay, no, we'll do one in person. Is it so? Yes, it is. I can do that. I need to get my 10,000 steps in.
So thank you for this presentation. On one slide, you showed us the process, archiving process. So there, and you mentioned validation. So can you explain what kind of validation is there?
Yeah, the validation is just to check that the materials are complete, that the form has been filled, that the files have been attached, that it's easy to understand for outside users. So it's a kind of basic check. So then we will also need to figure out how far we go, because the idea with this portal, it is completely open, and also that we don't. I mean, you cannot afford to invest too much time in checking everything, like to make sure that, it's, I mean, the idea is this responsibility of the authors. They deposit, it's open, and they have to make sure they have the copyright and authorizations to do so. So we have to find out also up to where we can do checks or not. But basically, it's already to see if everything is complete and easy to understand for people from like potential users or people who would access the data.
So you did answer one of the questions from the chat, but there are 2 more. Some repositories have APIs that can be consumed along with the respective data metadata. Could the replica platform be linked or integrated with such platforms for the purpose of replication of the data?
So this is more technical question, which I need advice from my technical colleagues. Yes. So.
Yes, it's possible to link. Actually, the main reason why it's not inside of the system that we are already maintaining is with just lack of resources. So it was easier to establish something small and light in parallel before we do the integration with a big system. Thanks.
All right, I saw another hand over here somewhere. Oh, Libby.
Thanks, Alex. Impressive to have this thing up and running. I think you mentioned you're waiting for materials to arrive or something. I'm interested. Are you trying to do outreach or advertising to researchers, and what about to journals?
Yeah. So especially we will start especially to advertise to journals and to conduct pilots with journals. So I think this is really the main audience we will start working with, and of course also inform the community and also welcome them to deposit their materials. But it's a key for us to work closely together with journals. Yeah.
Okay, the next one from the chat is they would like a little more clarification on data upload. Is the platform accepting data directly from researchers/students or serves as an interface between repositories?
I'm not sure I get the question right. So yeah. I'm not sure you understood. Okay, sorry, better than I did.
Yes.
Upload.
So it's directly from the researchers, from the users. It's not linked at this point with other virtual research environments where
Okay.
the data are held.
Yes, okay, sorry then. Sounded more complicated than what it was.
I'm going to take
No.
chair's prerogative and ask a question. So one of the arguments that I've had over the years with people, especially we're economists, we're terrible.
Yeah.
But the idea that the replication issue, especially when you look at the versioning of the software,
Mhm.
and how do you deal with the potential for longevity where you're not going to have backwards compatibility with current versions of software, or
Mhm.
software just disappears?
Yeah,
And is that
yeah.
something that you've started to think about?
Well, very well, we have not pushed that so far because the thing is, I will pass on
Yeah.
to Boyan afterwards. But it's true that for our data archive, I mean, we are, really upgrading and making sure that the data remains readable over time. And here with this platform, since it's completely open, it's more the responsibility of the researchers. But I don't know what will happen once it's integrated within SUSU-based, and maybe there will be, and this Boyana can answer, maybe there will be ways
Yes.
of ensuring.
Yes, so
This-
the platform is very new, and in next few years, as I already mentioned, it will be part of the large system CSU base, which is actually for long-term preservation of the research data.
Mm.
And we are OAS compliant. This means that all the archival packages, so all the files are converted in the long-term preservational formats, which are not proprietary, which are neutral, and it will be always converted into the new files or in the new technologies, how the technology evolves over the time. So they are kept in the neutral format.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Because I know
welcome.
that I've been involved in conversations with the technology people, that I'm not one of them, around virtual environments and building Docker containers so that you have that replicability going forward. And I just feel like that would be a huge burden on a system like this to have to take that kind of package in. I was just curious. Okay. Any other questions? In that case, I want to say thank you very much to our first presenter for doing an amazing job of staying on time, taking all kinds of questions, and having a fantastic presentation with a cat in it. All right, we need to go in because I can't. So I will introduce. Okay. So second presentation is also in person. Dr. Deborah Wiltshire. Do I have to pronounce the T?
Yeah.
Okay, Wiltshire. Is that close? Oh, all right, she's happy. Is a demographer and secure data access professional. She taught quantitative research and demographic methods at the University of Southampton in the UK. Before moving into the field of data governance and secure data access solutions. Deborah worked for a number of years at the UK Data Archive, specializing in data governance and statistical disclosure control, training hundreds of researchers in both topics. In 2021, Deborah moved to Germany, where she is currently the head of the Secure Data Center at GESIS Institute for the Social Science. Her research interests are the safe and ethical use of secondary data sources and the use of historical data to examine social change. She'll be speaking to us today about working together to ensure the safe use of sensitive and confidential data, exploring a collaborative training approach. Will you please welcome Deborah?
Thank you, Sam. Hi, everybody. Really good to see you all here today. I'm going to talk, thank you. These podiums are always really tall, so I feel quite dwarfed by this. No, it's fine. So I'm going to talk about how we work together to ensure the safe use of sensitive and confidential data through exploring a collaborative approach. Now, what I'm going to talk about is some work which is in the very, very early stages. So it's more an idea at this stage, which we hope will become something real later on. So I'll start off, I'll give you a little bit of background information, and then I'll move on to talk about training researchers and why we do that. And then, of course, we always have to acknowledge challenges because they're always there. That's what makes life interesting for us. And then I'll move on to talk about how we think a collaborative approach can help us address these challenges. And we've done a little bit of work here, so we've had some success. And I'll talk towards the end about the ideas we have for moving this work forward. So just to give you a little bit of background, so I work in a secure data access facility. We operate, at the moment, we operate a safe room where researchers can come and access data, which is very detailed and sensitive. And it's data that can't be accessed through any other access pathway. And really, anybody who works in one of these facilities, our main role is really to enable researchers to access these kinds of very, very detailed microdata. And it's quite specialized what we do. Now, what this also does is increases the scope and the detail of potential research projects that can happen. So it's really an important part of the research landscape. And what we've seen over recent years is an ever-increasing demand for these types of data. Now, there is an impact to making these kinds of data available. Now, we know that as the level of detail in the data increases, the risk of disclosure increases. And by that, we mean the risk of somebody in the data being re-identified, which is obviously something that we cannot allow to happen. Now, a lot of microdata can be anonymized without losing too much of its detail, but not all of it. So we have to look at appropriate safeguarding for these data. And essentially why we do that is because if we have a data breach or we're seen to have unsafe practices, then that access to this data closes down. It's really a very simple thing that we're dealing with. And we need to always have in the back of our mind that the public don't distinguish between us making a genuine mistake because of something that we couldn't foresee and a malicious or incompetent behavior. The public do not see the difference. So we have to demonstrate that we can be trusted, and we have to do that consistently, day in, day out. We don't get a day off really from this. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the 5 Safes framework because we can talk for a long time about it, but essentially it's a framework which looks at how we ensure the safe use of these data. And in a nutshell, what it means is we look at the projects to make sure they're valid, they have valid statistical purpose. We look at the people, the researchers. Are they going to use the data in the right way? We look at the data, is it appropriate for the access conditions, and so on. And all of those safes equal safe use. And the 5 Safes is important because it forms the basis for a lot of the security models that secure data access facilities use. Now, the one I'm going to focus on is the safe people. And this is where the research trainer comes in, researcher training comes in. Now, for a lot of research, secure data access facilities, part of the process of applying to access these data will involve some mandatory training. That's increasingly common. And it's an important part of a facility's security model. So we ensure that researchers are safe to use these data by training them first. And this training includes specific, very, very specific training on areas such as statistical disclosure, which we know is often lacking in other forms of research and data skills training. Now, experience tells us that if a researcher is more knowledgeable about these areas, then they are less likely to make the kind of mistakes which will lead to a breach. That we know through experience. What we also know is that actually if researchers are well trained, life becomes easier for them and for us. So the whole process becomes a lot more efficient. But there are a number of challenges. So it seems quite easy. You get a researcher, you train them, everybody's happy. Now, the challenge really is that we know training exists, but it can be a little bit piecemeal, it can be inconsistent across organizations, and general data protection training will often miss some of the more specific, specialized areas of knowledge that we need researchers to have. So it's often down to the secure data access facilities themselves to deliver this type of training, but that can be really difficult to implement. Now, we know that anybody who's developed a training course knows that it takes time. It's quite resource intensive. You need time, you need expertise. One thing a lot of secure data access facilities have in common is that we tend to be very small and we have small teams. So for example, in my team, there's me and one other full-time person, and that's quite a common setup. If you're in a facility that has more staff, you are really, really lucky. A lot of us do this with very small numbers of people. So to develop training from scratch can be a real problem. It can be a real burden. There's also few people available to deliver the training once it's developed. The other side of that is that we quite often have fewer researchers coming into our service. So what do? Do we wait until we have a decent number of researchers to run the training? That's the best approach, but it can mean that we have to wait a while to gather up enough researchers. So what we're looking at is causing delays for researchers, which can be a problem for them. So we've really been exploring how we can collaborate to overcome these challenges. So we want to know what scope there is to help facilities manage through collaboration. Can multiple organizations actually collaborate to develop training? And can they deliver a common training course together? Can we then also successfully accommodate our different needs into that communal training? Is it feasible? Now, there's a very simple answer to that, and the answer is yes. And I'll talk about an example where that actually happens already a little bit later. But I want to talk first about some of the work that we've done so far and what we want to do over the next few months. So the first one is this project number 1, which is the SHOCK canonical training materials. Now, SHOCK has been mentioned in a few presentations I've been to, but if you're not aware, this is the Social Science and Humanities Open Cloud project. Very large EU-funded project. Lots and lots of different work packages, lots of exciting work that came out of it. But this specific task was to design a set of canonical training materials that any organization could use. So what we did was we developed a set of training materials, which included a large slide deck, which would enable you to run a complete training course. And we also included a guide and delivery for the trainers. And the course is designed as a modular program. So you can see the modules here and what the sort of things that are covered. I've just added the link to the actual materials themselves if you want to go and have a look. But essentially, the course materials are a mixture between providing information, practical examples, and some ideas of some group exercises if you're running this as a group exercise. And the idea of this really was to have a set of materials which are freely available. So any secure data access facility who wants to implement some training can come along, download those materials and just make some tweaks or adaptations to suit their individual needs. And what we hope this does is to take the bulk of the work out for developing the course. Now, this was quite a conveniently timed project for me because in my secure data access facility, we don't currently train our researchers. And this is something that I want to implement myself. So actually having the task of developing these materials was just perfect. And I sat down afterwards and I thought, okay, so this now gives me the basis of my course. Does that solve all of my problems? And the answer is nearly. There's a few challenges which are outstanding that I have to think about. And the first one is delivering the training. So as I say, we're a very small team. Is that a practical thing for me to be doing these training courses? And then, you know, we're trying to build networks within Germany and across Europe. How can I make sure that standards of training with researchers that I deal with is going to be consistent if they've trained elsewhere? And what really is important, I think, is if a researcher wants to go to multiple access facilities, how do we reduce the need for them to train again? Now, I mentioned that there's a scheme where this is already working. Now, some of you will be familiar with this, some of you maybe not. But in the UK, there is the Accredited Researcher Scheme, which is overseen by the Office for National Statistics. And essentially what happens is there is a standard set of training that is delivered by multiple organizations within this consortium. So for a researcher, it doesn't matter who they train with within this consortium. So they can train with the ONS, they can train with the UK Data Service, they can train with HMRC. Doesn't matter because the training is the same across the organizations. At the end of this, the researchers take a test and assuming they pass, they get this status of being an accredited researcher. And that means that they can go and access data through any of these organizations. And it's just such a much more efficient service for researchers. The one thing that they haven't quite resolved is the issue of how we record this status and how it's managed between the organizations. So we started to have to think about this and, you know, the sort of thing you go to events, you talk to colleagues, you talk to friends across the industry. And we were having some of these conversations with various colleagues. So I was chatting to someone at Deutsche Bundesbank, talking to somebody who I see is at the back from the German Human Genome Archive. Near enough. I knew I wouldn't get it quite right. And we started to talk together about actually what could we do along the lines of this accredited researcher scheme in Germany. So I want to quickly introduce the Moritz and the AAI idea. So we don't have a fancy logo yet because this is still an idea. This is, you know, we're talking at the very birth of this idea. So the first stage is this modular online researcher training. Now, the idea here is to develop a suite of online training modules. Now, these will be self-study, modules that are available online, researchers can do them in their own time. So they don't have to come to a classroom at a specific time or come to an online classroom at a specific time. They can self-direct themselves. And the idea is that there will be a set of core modules which are mandatory. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. We're not going to make it quite that simple for them. They will need to do a bit of work, but this is just to give you a flavor of some of the ideas and some of the modules that we could include. So the core modules may include an introduction to research data protection issues. We can have a module on the 5 safes, for example. We can talk about output statistical disclosure control. And that would be the core set of modules that a researcher would need to do and to pass the test at the end of. But then we can also look at additional modules. So for example, if I'm a researcher and I want to do some work with genome data, for example, I would need to know a little bit more about specifically how to use the GHGA cloud, which is the system that the German, thank you, use. Or if I'm a researcher who wants to use some social survey data through GESIS, I could do the module on how to use the GESIS safe haven. And that's quite important because actually having a researcher who knows how to work within your system is going to make your life super, super easy. Then we thought actually we could have some data type specific modules as well. So again, if I'm still wanting to do some work with genome data, I might need to learn a little bit more about the specifics of safe handling of genomics data. So through this suite of modules, you can build up a very specific package of training modules for each individual researcher. And then we got a bit carried away and we started talking about, well, how can we deal with the people that work in the facilities themselves? Because believe it or not, none of us who work in secure data access facilities, there's no specific formalized training for this job. We all come into it and we learn essentially from each other. So we learn on the job. And there's quite a big sort of conversation going on about, actually, we should probably have some formalized training for what we do, given that the legal penalties for, making a mess of our job, is quite a problem. So that's the idea behind the training. And then the next stage is how do we keep a record of that? And how do we as an organization prove that the researcher that's coming to us has undergone the correct training? So then we're looking at this authentication and authorization infrastructure, or AAI. Now this is really small and I'm not sure whether you can actually read it, but essentially what happens is the researcher logs into the training platform, they do their modules, they take their tests, they pass, and that's recorded in the AAI system. And then that keeps a record. So you probably can't quite read that, but the slides will be available later. So have a look if you're interested. But essentially that gives us a record for that researcher. And it tells them who they are, what their institution is, and it gives a list of all of the courses that they've passed or haven't passed. So it's a training record, essentially. And then as an organization, we get a researcher coming to us and they say, oh yes, I've trained. We can use that same AAI system to check that out. So we can go in and we can say, oh yeah, okay, I can see their training record, they've passed all of the things that we need them to, they're good to go. And that really will take some of the manual work out of the process, because at the moment, certainly in the UK, we know from experience that that stage is it's still manual. So a researcher comes to us and we turn around and they say, oh, I trained with HMRC. We have to go and contact them manually. And it's a very laborious process if you have a lot of researchers. So this will just automate some of that and make it a lot smoother process. And I think almost bang on time. That was my last slide. As I say, this is really, really at the very, very beginning stages. So this is the idea that we have. So it's myself, Simon, who's at the back. We have Deutsche Bundesbank on board. We have the University of the West of England, who are the team behind the UK's accredited researcher training, and Baird at the moment in Germany. So we're a fairly small team, but I hope this will be an exciting development over the coming months. And that's it. Thank you very much.
We have time for quick questions.
Yeah, I didn't leave much time for that, sorry.
I know.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm very familiar with research data centers in the Canadian context, and at least there, researchers are allowed to take out vetted research results. Do you provide as part of your training demystifying if they're allowed to share those vetted results, as we've seen a lot of open data sharing requirements, or guidance even what researchers should put in a data management plan if they're not enabling or allowed to share their data?
I'm sorry, I completely missed that. Could you repeat the question?
Sure.
It was a bit echoey.
I have an assumption that they can take out vetted results from their center. Do you provide as part of your training demystifying, like, are they allowed to share those in a repository, those vetted results? Or do you provide guidance for researchers in support of writing a data management plan when it comes to data sharing practices?
That's interesting. We haven't talked about that actually, because the training is specifically for researchers who are accessing data that cannot be openly shared.
Yes, and I realize you wouldn't be sharing the underlying research data, but can researchers take out any of the vetted results?
Oh, yes, yes. So from the secure data access facilities, yes. All of them will have a process of output control. So the research output will be checked for disclosure risk.
And so do you provide guidance in that context? Are they allowed to share their data?
Yes, yes, we do. And actually it wasn't on the slide. There was one for the core modules would include guidance on the different types of output and what makes it disclosive so that researchers could avoid it. So for example, we know that tabular results are more prone to disclosure problems. Regression results tend to be much safer. So we train specifically on those different types of results. And each individual data access facility will give their researchers guidance on what kind of outputs they can request, what kind of outputs will be released, and what they can do with it. So once it's released, can they go and do, publish it anywhere? So it will vary a little bit between the organization, but generally everyone will give their researchers some guidance, yeah.
Let's use another warm round of applause. We have a remote presentation next. To get the.
Michael, you should be able to share.
Great, thank you.
You are muted though.
Testing.
There we go.
Okay, now I can do your introduction. Michael Beckstrand, PhD, serves as the Qualitative and Mixed Methods Research Associate with the University of Minnesota's College of Liberal Arts. There he teaches research methods courses and workshops and provides consultation on research design and methodological problem solving, technical support of qualitative and quantitative research software, collection and preparation of textual data for analysis, including web scraping and social media API access, and digitization, management and curation of qualitative data from text to images and audio. His presentation is titled, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, social media data collection." Please join me in welcoming Michael.
Thank you, San. Thank you for welcoming me from afar here. And I'm happy to be speaking with you all today a bit about our work at the University of Minnesota in supporting data collection from social media sources and the web, and trying to train researchers on considering the ethical implications of the work that they're doing and exactly how to get around some of the technical limitations of that access. And so a couple more words here about the context that I'm coming to you from. And as Sam mentioned, I'm coming as a person in research support at a large research university, and specifically being situated in a liberal arts portion of that. So we're dealing a lot with humanist and social and behavioral science research, and that's largely coming from graduate students who have very different questions and who might be experimenting in new methods and new sources and new fields for the first time. That also means that there is little to no funding support for the work that they are doing, and largely in the field of gathering, especially large quantities of data, money goes a long way. And so being able to provide support and access to information where the students cannot buy that access or pay someone to do it for them is an important component of this work. They're also coming from multiple different social and behavioral science fields, and so there are many different forms of analysis that we're trying to accommodate and meet the students where they are, and the faculty for that matter, and meet those different goals and sometimes competing interests for time and access to the information. And this work, while we're in sort of a research shop, is in close collaboration with the university libraries and the resources and training that they are providing as well. And then again, for myself, I come from a political science background, and so I am not necessarily, versed in copyright law or data access requirements, computer science, and things like that. And so this comes more from the research methodologist angle, and trying to join researchers from the sort of disciplinary background that they might be coming from and the academic interest that they're doing. And so why the best of times, the worst of times? Well, right now in considering social media data and other forms of data from the web, things are in very strong demand. Obviously, the past few years of pandemic and pandemic related lockdowns and restrictions to social and behavioral science research has meant people have turned to new sources that are very safely behind a computer screen, like I am here today. And so there is a big demand just in general for this kind of information, as well as interesting questions that they can answer in this time. Researcher skills continue to improve. When I started supporting data collection in this field, most people who were wanting or interested in getting information from Twitter or Facebook or any other social media platform hadn't really heard terms like APIs, or really necessarily would have thought of using a scripting language. And now people have at least heard of those things or have some concept of what might be possible, which is makes things a bit easier as an entree into providing training and support in that space. And access and tools continue to improve. over the past couple years as new technologies come online and certain companies make things a little bit easier for academics to gain access. And so all those things make the picture a little bit rosy and give our unit plenty to do in supporting work in this space. And so, for instance, a handful of the example projects that we've been supporting in social media access come from a variety of social media platforms. We've supported some limited work in collecting IRB, individually consented Facebook activity from cancer patients who were reaching out to their friends and family, and the way in which they would post about their conditions and trying to see what kind of social support and social network they were able to bring out from that outreach. There are also a number of public places, obviously on Facebook, and looking at political activity. There is a wilderness area in our state that was in danger of being mined, and a bunch of companies were trying to get in. And so watching the sort of advocacy around that on some of the public pages were also of interest. Reddit is obviously an open and sort of free source, which is easy to access. And so people looking for detailed conversations frequently turn to pulling information from Reddit. And so we can support in doing that. Twitter, things have gotten easier. Some of the early work that I've done in supporting that were sort of hacky workaround solutions. There were browser plugins that were allowing pulling manually from Twitter feeds if you did it right after. And so there were interesting conversations happening about certain television programs where the researcher was going on immediately after the program finished and pulled the last hours of conversation, but it had to do that manually every time the show aired. Similarly, over various of the racial justice and police brutality cases that happen in our state and across the United States, there have been sort of long-term data collection efforts around the conversations around specific victims and the discourse and flavor of that conversation there as well. But specifically the Twitter work has gotten easier as the academic research access has come on board in the last year and a half. Now Twitter allows researchers to apply for full access to all historical Twitter data. Previously, there was a restriction that prevented people from getting more than 7 days in the past. And so being able to go further back in time and get a broader sample of the Twitter API access has been a big push for us in getting people up to speed on using that and getting the applications through the system. I can say from personal experience and from my colleagues' experience, despite the fact that all the applications for sort of the Twitter academic research access, specifically saying things about having a particular research project in mind, they have not had any problem with us applying for the same access, saying that we support or train or provide data services around this information. And so we've got access through that way without having a specific research project in mind. And so I wouldn't feel shy about putting that kind of application for the elevated academic access in. But there are a number of simpler tools that we have access to and that some are broadly available. Now owned by the Facebook Meta company, there's a service called CrowdTangle that we particularly use when training undergraduates in pulling information. It also works on Instagram. It's one of the few ways to gather Instagram data because that platform is so locked down. It provides nice spreadsheet output. In days of old, there's a simple archiving Google Sheet that accesses Twitter's API for you and does that collection over a period of time. And again, we tend to use that with undergraduates who are trying to gain access and might not have the time or mental space to learn a scripting language. social media macroscope is a collaborative of a number of universities to provide sort of web-based tools to do the analysis and not just the collection. Again, in a common place where we train on undergraduate work. And so this proliferation of sort of easy to use tools and elevated data access has made it easier for people to get beginning, collect social media data and to start some basic forms of analysis and work and data visualization on that. However, it has also been a bit problematic as the demand for this type of data goes up and the general knowledge that it is possible to do some research on it. Our expectations among researchers tend to begin outpacing reality. And another thing that shows our age, or my age and some of my colleagues' age, is the focus on certain media platforms being easier. For instance, it is easy to get Twitter data and certain types of public Facebook data, but as generations move to other platforms like Instagram or TikTok or other things, those platforms are much more locked down, nearly impossible to get information out of. And so as more youthful researchers come on board and are interested in these new platforms, we are unable to accommodate because there are not yet ways to get that kind of data out for academic research. And so that makes for some difficult conversations in setting those expectations. Ethical guidance also seems to be largely lacking. Our particular institutional review board tends to view collecting information from social media as not human subjects work. And I think that is something I've seen in other institutions as well. And so there isn't a lot of guidance coming from the university writ large. Even disciplinarily, there tends to be the general principle or general assumption among many different social and behavioral science researchers that it's on the internet, therefore it's public, therefore we don't need to consider any kind of ethical considerations or make any leniences for what's going on. And that, especially when you get more towards public forums, becomes particularly problematic. And that's where the sort of research ethics line up with the terms of service that these companies, these private enterprises that are providing these social media platforms or discussion boards also put them out. And so with people tend not to read the terms of service, but very frequently there are clear guidelines on what can be downloaded or scraped or pulled from various websites, and getting researchers to pay attention to those or care about them or judge whether or not they should care about what the terms of service say is an ongoing struggle. And so we've had to do lots of training on thinking about copyright and fair use, and putting those kind of words and phrases and thoughts into the minds of the researchers that come to us, thinking about, as academics, sure that we might have a fair use argument, but you still might get your account locked out if you're trying to pull a bunch of information from something that says that you explicitly cannot do so. And so we do some training along that line. The other place, especially with our more humanist scholars that we have lots of conversations about, is whether and where it's appropriate to directly quote someone who has posted something on social media. And obviously one can look up, if you quote something directly, you can do a reverse search and find post back, find who said something and track down more information about them. And so walking through levels of anonymization, levels of abstraction about the social media data, even though it was at one time posted public, do you want to be fully outing, for lack of a better term, the participants that you have not consented to be part of your research project? And so that is an ongoing conversation with researchers that they go back and forth about trying to determine when and where they should be sharing the information that they have collected, and in what form they should write about it, and in what level of detail. And so seeking out sort of the middle ground, as I've sort of been alluding to this whole time, has been a lot of work on outreach and training and making these ethical questions and considerations a little bit more, bringing them more to the fore in researchers' minds as they're trying to conceptualize their projects and come up with the research questions or data sources that they might be pursuing. And so trying to give a broad overview of the platforms that might be available, getting them to think beyond maybe their pet social media platform, about other places that the conversations, the topics, the hashtags, the themes that they're most interested in might be happening, and whether those places might be easier to get information from, might be more public and have less consideration about the privacy or concerns around that. And so trying to push them to consider those things, to consider how and where they'll be using the information and whether they're going to be identifying their participants, and particularly what they're going to be doing with that information on the back end as in the analysis form. Thinking about those technical concerns, asking questions of them, what services are you targeting? Can you actually use the data? Does that service provide API access or other forms of direct access? If it doesn't, how are you planning to get it? Is it, allowed to do any kind of automated scraping or downloading? Are there tools? Pointing out where to look on the terms of service page, how to find the terms of service, what words to look for, automation, scraping, crawling, downloading, and seeing what may or may not be listed there. We tend to point out what APIs are, talk through the ways that websites talk to one another and give structured information based on structured requests, that there are limitations for those things. And then most notably, when we're doing coding training, we frequently do that with the Python language and in Jupyter, but we also have done that with R, but using not necessarily a social media API to do that training, but something that is a little bit more basic and easy to use, and our frequent target for the type of training of what is an API, how do you make a request to the website, what does it look like when that information comes back, tends to be the New York Times. And the New York Times provides a great free to use API that will give you article data, as well as they now have what they call the community endpoint, which provides comment data, which is one of the first places to get large batches of newspaper commentary. And newspaper comments are a bit of a mixed bag as far as what you're going to get out of them, but lots of people are interested in at least seeing the mire that can be and getting some sense of what the discourse there is. And so the New York Times does offer something, an access point to that as well. And so those sort of a little bit easier to use, but still broadly recognizable APIs tends to be our entree into walking researchers through how to set up a code that could go and do that pull without using a tool. And we also just try to do a lot of thought experiments on positing different research projects and asking the researchers to walk through some of the considerations that we're thinking of. Who are the people that are in this project? Would it be problematic if they were identified as being quoted in your work? Are there risks? Do you have obligations to them, even though they are, posting these things to the public? And again, just trying to get a lot of those wheels turning and conversations moving tends to be our main goal there. With that, I believe I am at time, so I'm going to thank you and see if there are any questions. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Are there any questions for Michael? Oh, yeah, would be Robin all the way in the back.
Thank you for a very informative and thoughtful talk on this subject. I'm just wanting to ask you a little more about the ethics question, because we had a bit of a conversation in the Birds of a Feather session yesterday about kind of where the boundary line is between what we as data support people should be, training and teaching people about ethics, and what should be done by the academic teachers, and also why, I don't know, I guess it's kind of common sense why it's such a bigger deal with social media data, but if you could just say a bit more about your thoughts on the ethical side of it, and what our responsibility is as data support professionals.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. And largely we do punt back a lot of it to the academic departments and what your, what are your advisors saying? What are your colleagues doing in this space? And the place where we have taken on some responsibility and is, as I feel, extensions of the university writ large, I don't feel comfortable blatantly violating terms of service. And so particularly when we've been looking at conversations about health data, and there are websites that explicitly say don't download these conversations about once you sign up for this service, you're going to be talking about your private health information. This is expected to be safe, and even if the people sign up for those services and are members in those communities, I'm not comfortable collecting that information, violating the terms of the service for them. So if I were to help code or gather information from other sources for people, that's where I draw the line, and sort of having that conversation about why I'm not doing it, and maybe they should think about doing something else as well, but that if they feel comfortable doing it, that's a conversation to have with their academic unit. And so we've largely tried, bottom line, I largely try to push those conversations back to the academic units, except for when it's sort of asking me to do things that seem to be pushing it for liability.
Quick. I'm looking at you.
Quick. Thank you for an interesting talk, and especially for making the point that just because it's on the web doesn't mean it's fair game for any use. My question is, you covered a large range of support you do, from early in research data lifecycle, access APIs, through to analysis and publishing. Do you give support or advice on archiving or curating such data? And if so, what do you say?
Yeah. Yes, and largely we walk through, especially with the Twitter information, there are little code packages and things like that to what they call dehydrate tweets down to tweet IDs, which are okay for archiving according to Twitter. And there seems to be some movement on whether some more full text things can be archived now that there's this academic access available. And so I'm curious to see what they say going forward about what can be stored from their material. But largely what I have had conversations with is pulling representative comments. And usually this is more in the qualitative sphere that I've been talking on the archival side. And so it comes down to what are the themes and concepts, and then pulling a handful of sort of exemplars that can be archived with the code book or the concept dictionary that goes along with that. If the platforms explicitly say they don't want their material, saved and archived and made accessible through another vein. But largely, I personally am sending those questions to our library to sort out, and our institutional data repository.
Excellent. All right. Can we give one more round of applause for Michael and say thank you?
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right. And last but not least, our final presentation of the session is also remote. And I'm going to do a terrible job with Sophie's last name, so I'm going to apologize right now. Sophie Forcadell. Is that close? Yay! Works at the Science Po Library and is an open science coordinator. She initiated a declaration in favor of open science at the institutional level and is also working on the foundations of a collective open science approach at the level of Civica, the European University. She will be talking to us today about institutional research data policy, feedback on development, strategic and operational issues. All right, and as soon as we have all the technical stuff sorted, I will be happy to have everybody applaud and let you get started.
Thank you very much, San. I hope you can hear me okay. Thank you for having me at this session. So I prepared the presentation with my colleague Anita Beldiman-Moore, who is also working at Sciences Po Library, and she is in charge of the research support staff at Sciences Po Library. So Sciences Po is a French university with 5 main disciplines in social sciences, of course, mostly political sciences. We have more than 14,000 students, I think, across all campuses, and more than 250 members are in the permanent faculty. And as for the library, we are almost 100 persons. So I'm going to talk about the Sciences Po University's data research policy that is currently being developed. So this presentation is in 2 parts. First part deals with the development of the research data policy, and the second part is about the role and the impact of this policy on the support staff organization. So the development of Sciences Po's research data policy was actually carried out in 2 stages. So we chose to take it step by step and somewhat slowly. So the first phase, which took place between 2020 and 2021, which were the difficult years because of the pandemics and so on. So it consisted of considering the needs of the researchers as well as the constantly evolving national and international frameworks. So we had a sort of a bottom-up approach based on a series of interviews with the research community, as just many universities do that also. And we also had a very deep understanding about what were the frameworks regarding the DMPs, the data deposits, the unique identifiers, and all these kinds of topics. So this led us to the writing and sharing of a first just declaration in favor of open science, which was aligned with the first French national plan for open science, but also aligned with the French National Research Center data plan, CNRS in French, and also with the ANR, which is the French Research Funding Agency requirements. So that was the first work. And then there was this second phase for this policy. And this second phase in 2022 focused on the management of the research data. So now that we have at Sciences Po a large number of Sciences Po researchers need or wish to manage and disseminate their data, the means of doing this, we think that the means must be agreed upon. So we conducted a further round of interviews which identified the main difficulties. And among them, we identified, for example, the unclear, the complex, the slow ethical and legal compliance procedures. So the researchers really need to something which would simplify and speed up procedures and responses. Also, the need for a shared definition of what is meant by data and the difference between storage, deposit, temporary or long-term archiving, sharing and reuse, of course. That was difficult for the researchers. Also, the need to know how to manage, share and store the code and the software, and how to anticipate this work so that it takes as little time and energy as possible. They also wanted to better understand the criteria, which criteria should be used to select a repository infrastructure for a given dataset, even if we already operate and maintain our own institutional data repository, which is called, by the way, data.sciencespo. And the need for guidance on legal issues and on the intellectual property of data and codes was also expressed. So all these needs and the solution that could be given have been included in a draft version of a data policy. And we really put emphasis on the governance and the organizational aspects, because they should really help find resources, make them sustainable, and also make our somewhat complex support organization more flexible, maybe. So again, this policy is also based on the frameworks, infrastructures, and services offered outside the institution and on the French national framework. So I just would like to very quickly to shift focus to this French framework. So the second French plan for open science is entitled Generalizing Open Science in France 2021-2024, and it was launched in July 2021. So it aims at developing now open science in 4 paths. So obviously publications, data, code, and change of practices. And this plan, just to tell you, is based on funding of 15 million euros per year. So the second pillar of this plan makes the deposit of the publicly funded data mandatory and provides researchers with a national deposit repository. So the plan also calls, of course, it calls on universities to develop policies that concretely indicate the means provided to fairize the data. So regarding the data, the most important development as for us is the launch of this national platform for research data. Actually, it will be launched next month, July 8th, I think. So its objective of this recherche data gov, as it is stated on the slide, is to make visible and possibly reusable both datasets, but also services provided by support teams in French institutions like universities like ours, research centers, and research organizations. So this open science plan and the National Research Data Platform have had a real impact on our data policy. It is a strategic impact, but not only, also an operational impact, and it gives us actually more resources. So among the main impacts, at first, about the infrastructures there. The Sciences Po institutional data repository hopefully will be harvested by the national platform. So it will enhance its visibility, but also hopefully its trustworthiness. Sciences Po researchers will also take benefit from a wider network of support staff at the national level now, which is called the data workshops. And the Sciences Po support staff will also take benefit from being part of this wider community of support staff. For example, in terms of training opportunities, for example, which will be given at this national level. So more broadly, this national encouragement to somewhat mutualization has also led Sciences Po to work on the coordination of our support staff, which is what I'm going to explain very briefly now. So we have organized the support to researchers on 3 principles and activities. So the first one is the cooperation between the members of support staff in a single data team. So the data team is transversal, not centralized. There are many jobs there, the archivists, librarians, statisticians, developers, webmasters, cartographers, administrative staff, feeding each other. So many of them are at the library, but many of them are directly in the research center. And they really are close to the researchers. The second activity is the communication, obviously, in the research centers and online. So this is really daily activities, raising awareness or publishing information on the web and so on. And the third one is about the training of researchers, the young researchers, the PhDs, and well, the data team itself. So finally, all the work we did to develop our institutional research data policy led us to articulate within these activities the services offered to the researchers. So 4 main types of services are now offered. The ones dedicated to the DMPs, obviously, the data papers, guidance, the deposit of data sets, and the guidance on long-term archiving with French infrastructures, which are called here CNES and SPARC. So our policy is still under embargo because it has not yet been voted on by the Sciences Po Scientific Council. It was a bit delayed, I'm afraid, but that's on its way. And what is the most important in this policy is that we establish an operational steering group at the level of the institution's scientific management to deal with all the intra-Sciences Po evolutions, but also these national and international frameworks very in a quick development. We also strengthen the role of the data team, especially if they are to also operate on a national level. We facilitate the acquisition of data, whether generated by the researchers or obtained from a third party. And hopefully we offer now good conditions for tracking, for the integrity and the openness, of course, of the processed data that's, throughout the entire research cycle, as we say, the way we support or the way we take responsibility for the dissemination and the preservation of data. So I think that's it. I hope I was not too long, and I'll be happy to answer all your questions.
Hello. Oh, there we go. No, that was perfect. Thank you, Sophie. Is there any questions in the room for Sophie? All right. Did we have any in the chat, Dylan? No. Well, you did an awesome job. Everybody knows what you had to say. So I want to thank you very much. Can we have a round of applause for all of our speakers, please? What? Oh, never mind. You don't get to go anywhere. We do have 2 questions in the chat.
Sorry, these were for the first two presentations left over.
Oh, never mind.
So the first one is for Force. Do you cooperate with international and foreign journals or only with Swiss journals?
So, yeah, no, the plan is to cooperate with Swiss journals. But the idea is also that Swiss researchers publishing in international journals can also deposit their replication materials with us. But we need to have a Swiss component as part of our policy. Yeah.
Okay, and the other question was for GESIS. Really great talk. Apologies if you've already answered this, but would this training expire?
We haven't decided definitely on an expiry date, but generally, yes, there would be a time limit. Now, in the UK example, if I can use that one, just because it's up and running already. In general, they have a 5-year period where the accreditation is valid. And towards the end of that 5-year period, the researcher would need to reattend training and pass the test again. And that's really just a recognition that things change over time, and it's good for researchers to keep their knowledge up to date and fresh. We haven't got as far as deciding our own expiry date yet, but there will be one, yes.
Right, now we're really done. So I want to say thank you to you for being a fantastic room of receptive audience. And it is time now for a break before our last session, before the posters and the banquet. So really have a great rest of your afternoon.